lot of the times what people associate me with instantly is when they saw me as minister in government, or when I started off by doing the due process. What those who know is that I was one of the agitators for June 12th. I led the concerned professionals as the first woman to lead that movement after it was formed. And the agitation for June 12th was based on the fact that for my generation, it actually was the first time many of us voted. It was the first time we were able to cast our vote, because the previous decades had been, continuous military rule. And so voting in that 1993 was an exercise of the power of the citizen to determine the democratic trajectory of their country. And so when we voted, it was with great joy and sense of freedom. And so when it was aborted, finally, those of us in the private sector, which was the group that made up what we call the concerned professionals, led by people like Patu Tommy and Atedo Peter Sada, and as I said, later on by a person like myself, we were aghast. And so we took to the streets and decided that we were going to not be constrained by our professional pursuit. We were going to have a voice and challenge that disruption of the democratic process. So for it to be that that symbolism of the right of citizens to shape their democratic state was violated, but today recognizing this as the day of democracy is clearly giving credence to what citizens had actually expected June 12th to have become. Of all the things that we can celebrate that the Fourth Republic is the longest uninterrupted period of the practice of democracy in our country. And the reason that I inverted my quote is because when you think of the quality of our democracy, it is still very rudimentary. It is nascent, it is fragile, it lacks the basic nuances and the ethos, the practices, the values, and the basic foundational matters of the philosophy of democracy, which is that it centers the people around governance. We haven't succeeded in that. We haven't succeeded in the practice of the separation of powers. We haven't succeeded in the principles of absolute adherence to the rule of law. So there are many things that we are practicing in the breach in our democracy. So our democracy is still not at the level. It hasn't even commenced the journey. I think that someone who, I think it was Mahmoud Jaga, who spoke at an event I attended yesterday, and he was trying to do the distinction between civilian rule, 20 years of civilian rule versus 20 years of democracy. So these are two different things. So we've had civilian governments, but we're still on the journey to democracy. And that journey to democracy is really about ensuring that governance is about the people. If governance is about the people, then what happens is that you give them good governance. And the features of good governance are things like transparency, accountability, inclusion, responsiveness, participation, voice, things like adherence to the rule of law, equity and equality. For as long as we don't have those, then what happens is we don't achieve economic growth and development, which is exactly what you need in order to improve the quality of life of your citizens. So without development being a twin of our democracy, we're still on a very long journey. But we can quicken the pace of our journey by ensuring that citizens would exercise that office of the citizen that they occupy to put the right kind of pressure that determines the quality of their democracy, the quality of their political system, the quality of political parties, the quality of political players, the quality of governance that they get, the quality of outcomes that improve their lives.